the webinar popped up a whole bunch of great questions, which we obviously didn't get a chance to get to. So I really appreciate you both coming back, making this time just to unpack some of these a bit further. Before we start, I just want to say that I'm on the lands of the Ngunnawal people here in Canberra, and pay respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and obviously respect the wisdom of living with 65,000 years of living with what the environment in this country can throw up. I think there's certainly a lot that we can learn. So thanks to you both. So we got a short time, and so I might just throw open the first question, which we've combined a number of them because they're around about 15 or 16, I think. So the first question is, how can we support sort of local councils to strengthen their DRR and sort of resilience capacity and support local decision making? David, do you want to sort of start with that one?
Yes, thank you, John. And recognizing, obviously, Kirsten, you're in that. So hello, everybody. My name is David, and I'm on the unceded lands of the Gundungurra and Dharawal nations, and it's a privilege to be here. The obvious response, John, is to fund it. We've 0.5% of tax revenue goes to local councils, yet they're expected to do the work. So the obvious point is fund it. And the second thing is take it seriously. We live in a top-down approach, and that has benefit for the immediacy of recovery, or relief rather, but absolutely does not for recovery. You take away the power of the people who make the decisions, and frankly, you infantilize communities if you don't listen and tell. I've never met anybody who disagrees with that, but the way it plays out in reality is that we don't change that system. And unless and until we get the funding and we sort out the idea of actually listening and being truly community-led, community-centered, we're stuck in this cycle of saying it but not meaning it.
Yeah, right. And Kirsten, I mean, you've worked in a lot of local governments over many years with different sort of levels of resource base. What's your thoughts?
I mean, I entirely agree with David. I think one of the, I suppose, more practical solutions is working together, working with your neighbouring councils, in terms of, many hands makes light work, and being able to build off the networks and the experience that maybe other councils have got, or even wider for that. And use those partnerships. Use those partnerships as much as you can, particularly in this sort of stage at the moment. It could be with training as well as case studies and projects and things like that too. So
yeah. Great. Then look, another question is, I think almost along the same lines, but different sort of targets. So, and it also talks about funding and resourcing of common challenges, and but this one's focused on community organisations. So I think we can kind of roll this together, particularly as we know that organisations like neighbourhood houses and other sort of support services are playing a much greater role in both DRR and recovery. So again, how can we sort of look at increasing the funding? What is the mechanism for this? But I think to both of these two questions, how do we upskill council and community staff and volunteers in DRR and resilience?
It's a really good question. I mean, it's a really good question, and I think a lot of organisations probably, particularly around that sort of local government, struggle with this. In Victoria, we don't really have an agreed training framework on all of these things that we should know across the spectrum of emergency management. It's obviously there's a lot in the response phase for emergency services, but certainly not in the recovery in the recovery phase. I think that sometimes, that sort of the data and the evidence of what these organisations are doing in the community is integral in terms of that advocacy piece, and is often missing as well. So understanding what they're doing, what who they're supporting, the impact that they're having at that level is really important to be able to start to say, look, what we could do if we have more funding. I mean, that's just one kind of example. It's obviously easier said than done, though.
Yeah, sure. David?
Yeah, no, I agree with Kirsten, of course. How to upskill in DRR. I think there are two big secrets. I mean, one is there are existing things around. Of course, there's Get Ready, the PCEP work that Michelle Villeneuve does from Sydney and others. So there's lots of really good stuff. I think one of the big secrets, though, is this idea of building what exists. As Daniel Aldrich talks about the importance of libraries, and we call it social capital, those connections. So it might be the basketball team or the soccer team or the supporters of that actually in times of disaster turn their skill set and their combined abilities to that. And I think we suffer in preparedness and DRR and recovery, actually, when we separate disasters from the everydayness of things, and we professionalize it, we make it separate, we put it over there. Therefore, it becomes a bit of a dark art. Actually, it's part of everyday life, sadly. And actually, coping and recovering from as part of everyday life is where a lot of the principles are for good DRR.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we certainly. Oh, go on.
Oh no, I was going to say I think one of the biggest challenges in terms of is building the bridge over I don't know if apathy is the right word, but until a community has experienced a disaster, sometimes it's really hard to engage in that space beforehand, and I feel sometimes the best way is that lived experience and being able to share that. If we had been able to do this or do that beforehand, or if we'd known this beforehand, this is how things might have been different. But I totally agree in terms of thinking of emergency management or response and recovery as that community, the things that happen every day. Like you have your social networks, whichever club that you attend, or the people that you see down the street or whatever, and being able to build on that is really important.
I'm reminded just on that the sort of deniability kind of element, and I think a lot of us are guilty of that until it happens. When you're a music guy, John, I'm reminded of the immortal lyrics of Rainbow's "It Can't Happen Here" from 1980. That we should play that a lot. That sadly it can happen here.
Yeah. And I think, yes, I also think the sector also has to be ready to cede control and power and work and be able to kind of work with community groups as well, because we're also not good at that. We want to be able to kind of keep control. So, and I think we also have to be ready as well and identify those basketball teams and land care groups and the like, and who are the movers and shakers, to Daniel Aldrich's point, that those connections, there are the movers and shakers. So if you can get the right person in the community, you're going to connect really well. And I think that is an interesting one, because one of our other questions is around social ties, and so how do we improve like social ties both between neighbours, but also between communities and councils and organisations, because a lot of what we talk about is based on trust.
Yeah, it certainly is. I think it's about providing opportunities for those groups to come together in whatever way, shape or form that is. That could be on the micro level or macro level, like we have all of our sporting groups that come together for a winter forum and a summer forum, but on the micro level, it might be being able to have a come and meet at a cafe, and really kind of socially isolated community members having that one point where they can meet up on a monthly basis with people, or a shared interest or something. And I think councils, if we use our partnerships at the local level, we've got really lots of opportunities to provide those events or those opportunities. Obviously it takes funding sometimes, but it's also the will, and then also understanding how it all, like the benefit. It's not just a coffee for some people. It's actually, oh, now I can call Joe when something goes wrong, or the power's gone out, and now I've got someone else who might check in on me, or something along those lines. So yeah, providing those opportunities at all levels, I think, is really important.
Yeah, David?
No, I think you said, and the plug that we discussed a bit in the seminar about webinar of a fourth half of resilience that councils, and recognizing it's a long game, because the chicken and egg is that those in power say, well, local government doesn't have the capacity. Well, there's a reason for that, and they do, but it could always be stronger. But it's the investing in that stuff, and if you want it to be local, guess what? Localize it.
Yeah, and certainly that's the big challenge, and being open to it, I think.
Yeah, it's the commitment to do that, and to think about governance. And that's as old as the hills. I mean, that discussion's been around for decades at least, in many places, about supporting localized capacity.
Yeah.
But it's a decision. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. And it has to be supported into the long term too. It can't be just like a short term. I think we've seen enough of that, but these we're really sort of talking about long term investments.
Yep.
I've got one more question, and this one's very different, and it's a big one. So I think this is probably going to be it'll be a subject of one of our webinars. But this is really around the tension between planning and housing supply and DRR, and so how. And this may be more for you, David, I think. But how do we advocate for DRR outcomes when there are real pressures on councils and states to increase supply? And we're hearing that a lot at the moment during the election campaign. So I'm just wondering, how can we start to insert those sort of conversations into that bigger, broader policy question?
Well, if only there was a magic bullet, but of course we know there isn't. But because it is election season, and you see this all the time, it's a competition for priorities around limited resources, and that describes humanity, right, and the political system. So the question is whether it's important enough collectively for that decision to be made not to build on floodplain zones. As I mentioned in the webinar, we interviewed a very seasoned insurer who said, I still don't understand why we build on floodplains. And you think, wow, you've really cut through that. And of course, we all know the reason is because of the pressures on land and the rest and and so all those things. But it comes down to a competition around decisions. And sadly, or otherwise, after a disaster, our memories are clearer, won't happen again, can't happen here, all that kind of stuff. And yet, of course, that fades. And that's the human condition, and not because we're stupid, but because we have competing priorities right in front of us. It's called basic needs, and then building things. So we kind of get it, right? But it does need the people to remind us of the awful things that have happened all over this country, and sadly will get more intense, to actually put that high up and not forget when it comes to electoral season, and then the follow-on decisions, especially around planning and about that. So yeah, again, no magic bullet, but it's trade-offs. A great quote from politics is, "We have politics because we can't agree," and that's true.
Yeah, it's true.
That's the summary. There's a full stop there.
Yeah.
So how we push for that thing, I suppose, advocacy and pushing and not forgetting, and sadly it'll become more prescient, of course, and there it is.
Yeah. Kirsten, anything you want to add to that?
No, I mean, just really in really general terms, I think that also that investment in ensuring that the planning and the building system at the state level it works, and that I suppose some of those decisions about local areas aren't being made at the state level without that local input in terms of experience and knowledge about what happens in that space. I think we've seen, maybe in Victoria, like issues around the building, the building industry and the quality of those houses and that infrastructure and those sorts of things. And so when you looked at those, areas that David had on his diagram in the webinar, you know, the enforcement, the compliance codes and stuff around the quality of what we're building also needs to be, that system needs to be improved as well, for sure.
Yeah. I would just add one final quick observation, if I may. This is a very big country with not a lot of people in it. And I mean, obviously we have a lot of arid places, and I'm not saying otherwise. You compare this to Dhaka and Bangladesh or other dense places. We should be leading from the front. And I repeat that point made by a colleague. We should be leading from the front on this.
Yeah.
Do you think, and I've just penned this piece for this thing called the Recovery Almanac, which is from by this outfit called How We Survive, and in that I kind of spoke about like understanding the true impacts of disasters so it can help with decision making, because I think, well, I have a view that perhaps decision makers don't actually understand like the true risks, the true consequences, and so it's often sort of seen as fairly simplistic. You know, flood comes, it washes away or burns down the house, or whatever. You know, fire burns down the house. So I'm just wondering, is that an issue that sort of decision makers don't have all the information at their fingertips, and would they make different decisions if we knew that it's not just about replacing the house, it's about all those other impacts on people's lives that will extend decades and that sort of thing. So I wondered whether that it might be something that we're sort of also grappling with.
Really good question. I think it's like you would have to say logically decisions would be made differently if all of those things were taken. Maybe we wouldn't be where we are at the moment. I think that link between research and what happens on the ground, and then the decisions that are made generally in the heat of the moment as well, and not really. I always feel like there's that, you know, once the water's gone away and the media's gone away, those communities, like, there's no one goes back to them, you know. What does that look like? And I think that investment in what do these disaster impacted communities look like 2 years, 5 years, 10 years later, and how that then really should inform all of the things that we do. I think there's a lot of work that we could do in that space, and that lived experience of people, not just the infrastructure, but the actual experience of people is so important.
To corrupt a well-known phrase, it's whose priority counts before and after. And the priority may, and I'm actually not a cynic to politics, I'm not, but you know, it's the competing powers and voices and wealth and other things that will play out in these things. Of course, we all know that.
Yeah. Well, thank you both. That's all we've got time for, and I really appreciate you both coming back and giving voice to these questions. I mean, it was a great webinar, and the fact that people were so engaged with it, it's just something that really excited us. So it was really, again, I want to thank you for giving up your time for both and knowledge for the webinar itself. It's one of our more successful ones, and had some really great reactions to it. Now coming back and answering these questions. So thanks to you both.
No problems.
Well, congratulations to you, John and AIDR, for putting this on the agenda. Clearly, you've tapped into something.
Yeah.
So
the level of questions and the number of questions really shows that you have a good series on its way. I feel it.
Yeah. Can't wait for the rest.
Well, and as I was saying, some of these questions will turn into, I think, their own webinars because of the depth of them. So anyway,
thanks for having us.
No worries.
Great to see you both as always.
Okay.
See you, Kirsten. See you, John.
Thanks. Bye.